Jacob's Well is a spring fed by the Middle Trinity Aquifer here in Hayes County, just northwest of the city of Wimberley.
For more than 100 years, divers have tried to reach the bottom of Jacob's Well, and almost all of them turn back at the same brutal squeeze, certain that whatever sat beyond it would stay hidden forever. In 2023, one team finally pushed all the way to the end. They went in expecting limestone, sediment, maybe a dead end. What they found on the other side was nothing they had trained for, and nothing they have been able to forget since. And once you see it, I do not think you will look at this place the same way again. The pretty part. Let me paint you a picture, because on the surface, and I mean that almost literally, Jacob's Well is one of the most beautiful places in Texas.
Jacob's Well, it is a big artesian spring. A normal flow rate for us is about 4 cubic feet per second.
It sits near the small town of Wimberley in Hayes County, an artesian spring that has been pulling people toward its banks for well over a century. The water is a shade of blue-green that looks almost artificially perfect, the kind of color you expect from a resort brochure. On a hot day, it holds at a constant 68 degrees, crystal clear, achingly beautiful, completely irresistible. The opening sits at the bottom of a shallow swimming hole, a circular mouth in the limestone about 12 feet across, and from there it drops straight down about 30 feet. Float above it and you can peer into that vertical shaft and watch the walls fall away into blue. Local teenagers have been leaping off the surrounding rock ledges and swimming over that opening since the early 1900s. It became a rite of passage in a region with few swimming holes like it. And here is the thing people forget.
People use as a diving board to jump in Jacob's Well.
The name shows up in records as far back as 1850. But the spring was known to the indigenous peoples of this region for thousands of years before any settler wrote it down. The Tonkawa here treated springs like this with a reverence early settlers waved off as superstition. They did not swim in it. They did not camp near its mouth after dark. Their oral traditions did not call it a source of life. They called it an entrance. To what? The records never say. And now that I know what is down there, that silence is harder to shrug off than I would like. The spring feeds Cypress Creek, which runs through Wimberley and supplies water to a good slice of the surrounding community. In the most literal sense, this place is a lifeline for the region, which makes everything we are about to talk about more complicated. The 8 below. This is where the postcard version ends. Beneath that 12-foot opening and the 30-foot shaft below it, the well opens into the first of several underwater cave chambers. And the passage twists and narrows in ways that are treacherous even for experts. Cave diving is already one of the most dangerous things a person can choose to do. An environment with zero margin for error. Make one mistake at depth inside an underwater cave, and that cave becomes your tomb. Jacob's Well has taken at least 8 confirmed lives since the 1960s. 8 people who went down into that water and did not come back up. The youngest was barely in his 20s. Several were trained, certified divers who knew exactly what the risks were. They went in anyway, which tells you how powerful the pull of this place is. And they did not come back, which tells you how dangerous the reality underneath it is. I want to be straight with you here, because the official story has always been the tidy one. Silt-killing visibility, equipment failing in the confined space, divers losing their bearings and running out of air. Everyone is plausible, backed by enough accident data to close the file. But the divers who made it back out kept saying something those reports never accounted for. The current inside the well behaves in ways the geology should not allow. In a normal artesian spring, pressure pushes water upward from below, so you expect to be nudged gently up and out as you descend. What divers reported was the opposite. There were stretches where the current reversed and pulled them deeper instead, changing direction based on nothing they could see and nothing tied to the season. Several described the water actively working against their exit. Not gently, aggressively. It went into dive logs, got passed around the tight community of Texas cave divers, then set aside. Because without reaching the true bottom, nobody could explain it. It stayed unexplained right up until 2023. The rock beneath. Before we go down with that team, we need to talk about the rock because it is the key to everything else. Jacob's Well sits in the Edwards Plateau, a massive formation of Cretaceous limestone that underlies much of central Texas. This is karst terrain shaped over millions of years by slightly acidic water dissolving soluble stone. It finds cracks, widens them, carves tunnels and caverns where you would swear there was solid ground, and the surface above looks completely ordinary right up until the moment it does not. Sinkholes are the loud version of karst announcing itself. Jacob's Well is the quiet version, far more extensive than anyone watching from the surface ever guessed. Before 2023, geologists knew the well connected to a broader cave system reaching beneath the hill country. It is basically the surface outlet of a hidden plumbing system that runs for miles in several directions. The water that surfaces here rises out of the Trinity Aquifer, the groundwater system beneath this stretch of the Texas Hill Country. Limestone aquifers like this supply drinking water to millions of people, which means the hidden passages feeding Jacob's Well are not just a curiosity. They are part of the machinery that keeps the whole region alive. What nobody had, because nobody had ever fully mapped it, was the exact architecture of the cave directly beneath the well. How many chambers, how deep it ran, and what on earth was bending those currents back on themselves. The hydrologists who studied the system had a hypothesis they called a secondary conduit network, a second tier of passages running under the main cave at much greater depth, capable of producing exactly the reversals divers kept describing. But a hypothesis needs evidence, and getting it meant someone had to go all the way to the bottom. And this is where I should be honest about why a channel like this even exists. Most of what is genuinely strange about our planet is hidden in places almost nobody can reach, and somebody has to go down into the dark and bring the footage back so the rest of us can finally see it. If that is the kind of thing you want more of, take 1 second right now and subscribe to Reef Discovery, because what comes next is exactly why I started doing this. The team that finally reached the bottom of Jacob's Well did not find what anyone expected. Early attempts. Serious diving here goes back to at least the 1970s, when recreational scuba had grown popular enough to produce people skilled enough to try the passage. Early divers mapped the first chamber, confirmed the passage continued, and came back. Some came back only barely. Through the 80s and 90s, technical cave diving became its own discipline, with its own training and its own hard-won safety rules, and divers certified in that specialty started pushing deeper. They mapped what became known as the 4 chambers, a series of connected spaces descending through the limestone. The first sits about 30 feet down, the second drops to roughly 50, the third reaches around 80, and then there is a fourth, deeper still, where the passage beyond it becomes something even the most experienced divers describe as genuinely alarming. It narrows to a point where you have to take your equipment off and push it ahead of you to get through. The walls close in from every side. The silt on the floor, stirred by a single fin kick, blooms into total blackness in seconds. And the current, always the current, doing things it has no business doing. I want to show you something because it is the detail that got under my skin. I read the dive logs from some of those early attempts, and the language in them starts to change right at that squeeze. These are documents written by professionals trained to record everything in flat, clinical terms, the kind of people who do not editorialize. And then, at that one spot, the words shift. Words like uncomfortable start showing up. The phrase wrongly shaped appears in more than one account. One diver, a man with more than 300 cave dives behind him, wrote that he turned back not because of equipment and not because of visibility, but because the passage gave him a deep, irrational sense that it did not want him there. He knew that was not a scientific observation. He wrote it down anyway. Those logs are what convinced the 2023 team they had to go further than anyone before them. Not because a veteran's uneasy feeling counts as data, but because when professionals with hundreds of dives independently report the same inexplicable sensation in the same spot, something physical is producing it. And whatever that something was, nobody had found it yet. The full descent. The team that entered Jacob's Well in the spring of 2023 was not a group of thrill seekers with cameras and a channel to feed. I say that with no disrespect to thrill seekers with channels to feed, obviously. This was a coordinated expedition, technical cave divers certified to the highest levels in the field, a hydrologist who specialized in karst aquifer systems, an underwater archaeologist, and a cave mapping specialist who had cut his teeth on one of the longest underwater cave networks ever documented, down in the Yucatan in Mexico. Their equipment was the state of the art. Rebreathers that recycle exhaled gas to stretch dive time far past traditional scuba. Redundant lighting, because inside an underwater cave, light is not a convenience, it is survival. propulsion vehicles to fight the current without burning all their energy, cameras on articulating rigs that could film in spaces too tight for a diver to turn around, and sonar gear that builds a three-dimensional model of the passage in real time so they would know the shape of a room before their eyes could. On paper, it was overkill for a spring near a small Texas town. In practice, every piece of it would end up mattering. And here is how serious they were about it. They spent 3 full days on surface preparation before a single diver got in the water, logging the spring's flow rates, sampling water at multiple depths, and building a passage map from every previous dive log they could find. The known sections were marked in detail. Everything past the 4th chamber got one label, unknown. On the 4th day, the first team went down. The first 2 chambers went exactly as the records described, familiar work for divers at this level. The 3rd showed them something they noted but did not yet understand. The walls were scarred at a consistent height, horizontal scoring running all the way around the tunnel like a bathtub ring left by water that had receded long ago, but deeper and far older than anything a human diver could have caused. They filed it away and kept ascending toward the squeeze that had stopped everyone before them. Whatever had carved that ring, it had done it long before any human ever looked down into this water. The 4th chamber is where everything changed. What they found. The squeeze that had turned back so many experienced divers proved just barely navigable with the modern rebreathers and the propulsion gear. Barely. The lead diver told the others afterward it was the closest he had ever come to calling off a dive. And this is a man who has threaded the underwater caves of the Yucatan. Picture it for a second. He is at the front of the line, 100 feet of water and rock stacked over his head. And to get through, he has to stop, unclip his tank, and feed it into the gap ahead of him, then follow it blind into a space no living person had ever been inside. Behind him, the rest of the team holds position in the dark and waits for his light to tell them it is safe. And when his light finally came up on the far side, it landed on something the known maps of this cave swore could not be there. It opened. Not into another chamber like the ones they had already passed. It opened into a void. The sonar registered the space, and one by one, they came through the gap and simply stopped, hanging in the water, staring at their instruments before they would let themselves believe the readings. The chamber beyond the squeeze was enormous, far bigger than any of the 4 above it, the ceiling arching more than 40 feet over their heads, the far walls past the reach of their lights. And the floor was not limestone, it was sediment, deep and soft, built up over a span the instruments said ran further down than they could measure. The walls were covered in formations, speleothems, the mineral deposits that only grow in open air, which meant this room had once stood dry, possibly for a long time. Possibly in geological terms, not so long ago at all. And then the lead diver's beam swung low across the sediment, and he stopped moving. He did not signal, he just held there, light locked on one patch of floor, until the others drifted up, beside him, to see what had stopped him cold. I want to be careful here, because the scientists who were there are still arguing about what it means. But what the cameras show is not ambiguous. There were bones on the floor of that chamber. The underwater archaeologist finned down low and hovered just above the sediment, the way you hover over something you are afraid to breathe on, and made his first assessment on camera, his voice flat and deliberate under the hiss of the rebreather. At least 4 separate people, some of the remains half sunk into the silt, some lying near what looked like degraded wood or fiber, none of it anywhere close to modern. The mineralization alone pointed to something far older than any diver lost in this system in the last 60 years. And it was the way they were lying that he kept coming back to. Not scattered the way bodies dragged in by a current would be. Clustered, grouped together, close, side by side, as if they had been laid down on purpose, or had settled together under conditions that were anything but random. Nobody touched them. That is the discipline that separated this team from a lot of what came before. They documented, they measured, they filmed from every angle the cameras could manage, and they left every fragment exactly where it lay. This was a site now, not a souvenir, and they treated it that way even with the air clock ticking and their own nerves screaming at them to start back up. Then there was the current. At the deepest point, the team reached about 140 feet below the surface of the swimming hole where teenagers cannonball off the rocks on summer afternoons. The hydrologist deployed a flow meter. What it recorded confirmed the hypothesis the specialists had been kicking around for years. There was a second conduit network beneath the chamber, a strong, steady flow of water moving sideways, not up. through passages in the floor, too small for a diver to enter, but unmistakably there. That deep lateral flow was the mechanism behind everything. When pressure shifted in the broader aquifer, those conduits shoved water back up through the main passage in directions that made no sense from the surface. This was never a simple spring. Jacob's Well was the surface mouth of a multi-tiered machine of staggering complexity, and its deepest tier had been moving water through that buried room for longer than anyone had reckoned with. Long enough that the divers who died up in the squeeze never really had a chance. They were fighting a tide that began 100 feet below them, in a room none of them knew was there. They made one more discovery before they turned for the surface. On the far wall, about 8 feet above the sediment, the camera caught markings cut into the limestone. Lines, deliberate, repeated, arranged into patterns. Not the random fracture of geology, not the scuff of modern gear. The underwater archaeologist swam up to the wall, planted himself in front of it, and filmed for 11 straight minutes without saying a single word. The only sound on the tape is the slow mechanical rhythm of his rebreather, in and out, while his light moves along the lines, one at a time. When he finally wrote it up, he refused to guess at the age or the origin until the lab work was done. But hanging there in front of those marks, 140 feet down, with 4 sets of human bones resting on the floor behind him, he let himself put down one sentence. The conclusion was almost too simple to say out loud. Someone had known this place. The science speaks. The data took months to process, and here's the part that surprised me, because I went in braced for the usual. A story like this normally gets the eye roll, the polite dismissal, the quiet filing away. This one got the opposite. The scientists leaned in, and the more carefully they looked, the stranger it got. I have read enough of these write-ups to know what professional caution sounds like, and there is a particular flavor of it that shows up when people have seen something they cannot yet explain. That flavor is all over this one. The hydrology landed first, probably because it was the least controversial and the most immediately useful. A confirmed deep secondary conduit network changes how this whole section of the hill country groundwater system is understood. And several hydrologists who reviewed the data flagged the same thing I keep turning over in my head. That lateral flow is a previously unmapped pathway, one that contaminants could in theory travel along, between the surface water people swim in and the aquifer that supplies communities downstream. That is not a small footnote. That is the kind of thing that makes the people in charge of the water supply go very, very quiet. The geology backed up what the instruments had hinted at. Those open-air formations meant the chamber had stood above the water table at some point, and the best current estimate puts the last time it was dry somewhere between 8 and 12,000 years ago, in the unstable stretch after the last ice age when water tables across the plateau were swinging wildly. Stay with me, because this is the part that quietly rearranges everything. That window is exactly when the archaeological record shows people moving across the Texas hill country, a dry, walkable cave, people in the area, and bones on the floor. The remains themselves are still being studied. Microsamples were extracted under approval from state antiquities authorities, carefully, by the book, and the early results confirm the basics. The bones are human, they are ancient rather than modern, and they predate European contact in the region. Past that, the researchers are holding their tongues until the full analysis is in, which honestly only makes me want the answer more. The markings are where it gets contested, and where everyone goes quiet. Several archaeologists who have seen the footage say the patterns echo marking traditions at other prehistoric sites in the broader region. None will commit to what they mean. All of them agree they are deliberate and that they matter. One of them put it in a way I did not expect from a scientist, and it has stuck with me since. He said studying that wall was like finding a letter written in a language we are still learning to read, still open. Here is the part I cannot shake, and it is not the bones or the markings or the impossible current. Those are the kind of disturbing that science gets to eventually solve. What I cannot shake is that Jacob's Well is still open. Right now, when water levels allow it, there are people leaping off those rocks and swimming over the 12-foot mouth of a system that has killed at least 8 of them. That holds the clustered remains of at least 4 ancient human beings nobody has finished identifying, and whose deepest tier can, under the right pressure, pull a strong swimmer down instead of up. The site is managed by Hays County under a permit system, with rules against diving into the opening without certification, and it has been closed for long stretches when drought dropped the water too low. But the surface stays open. There are children up there. There are people who have no idea what is layered in the dark beneath them, looking down through that gorgeous blue-green water at a bottom they cannot quite see, feeling the exact pull of curiosity that has been drawing people to this spot for as long as anyone has lived near it. The same pull those 8 divers felt. The same pull, maybe, that the people whose bones are down there felt long before there was a town or a permit or a parking lot. And that is the whole horror of the place in one image. It looks like summer. It looks like joy in cold water and jumping off a rock into something beautiful. And underneath that surface, in every sense of the word, sits a multi-tiered machine of water and stone that has been building for millions of years, that holds the dead of people who knew this place in a way we are only beginning to understand, and that has been quietly collecting the modern dead the whole time, while the surface kept right on smiling. Someone left their marks on that wall, and they're dead on that floor, thousands of years ago in the dark, at the bottom of a cave that has since filled with water. What they were trying to say, we are still working out. What they knew about this place that we still do not, that is the question that is going to sit with me for a long, long time. And if you have made it this far, I think it is going to sit with you too. So, I want to hear from you. Knowing everything we now know about what is down there, would you still swim over that opening on a hot summer day? Or would you stay up on the rocks and just look? Tell me in the comments, because I read them, and the answers to this one are gonna be worth reading. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe to Reef Discovery and stick around, because there are deeper and stranger places than this one, and I am nowhere near done going down into them.